Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Sarah Boisvert. She is the founder of the New Collar Network and Fab Lab Hub. Her career spans advanced, quote unquote, smart manufacturing, and we'll learn about that a lot today. She's also done a lot in the realms of art and music and innovative workforce training. So, Sarah's mission as part of the Fab Lab Network is to create pathways that don't always require college degrees for people to get well-paying, engaging careers, what she calls new collar careers. So we're going to be talking about that a lot here today. Careers that utilize disruptive technologies like 3D printing, laser machining, robotics, VR, and AI or machine learning. So before I tell you a little bit more about Sarah and her background and career, joining us from Santa Fe, New Mexico, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Oh, thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
I'm going to ask you real quick for those who are watching on YouTube, you might notice why I'm asking, are your earrings 3D printed?
My earrings most certainly are 3D printed. And it's interesting because technology people always ask me, why do you always wear those same earrings? And they're fabulous branding. So everyone knows me by my neon green earrings.
And you said, I'm afraid it cut out, they're certainly not 3D printed, or they certainly are?
Oh, they certainly are.
They certainly are. Okay, just wanted to confirm that. They are a cute, cool, kind of open cubic shape. So maybe we can find a way to share a picture of those in the notes for those who are just listening. But Sarah is the author, among other things. She's the author of two books. First off, The New Collar Workforce, and the second book called People of the New Collar Workforce. So in collaboration with Santa Fe Community College, Sarah has also founded the New Collar Innovation Center at the Santa Fe Higher Learning Education Center in 2021, recent project, to foster innovation and lifelong learning, new collar workforce training, and the creation of 21st century startups. So I also want to mention, as a couple of my previous guests here recently have been, Sarah is going to be part of the AME annual conference. She's going to be, it's being held in Dallas, October 17th through 20th. For more information or links for how to register, look in the show notes for that. And so Sarah's going to be part of a main stage keynote panel. Joining her in that panel are going to be Deandra Wardell, who is my guest here in episode 405 of the podcast, and also Amy Gowder, the president and CEO of GE Aviation Military Systems Operations. I'm going to be moderating that panel, so it's going to be a good time. Deandra, listeners will know, has been a good friend of mine, and people may not know, Amy Gowder is my wife. So I say that in the interest of full disclosure. We're still figuring out how much that needs to be disclosed. But so Sarah, again, thank you for being part of that group and for joining us here today. I want to ask you about some of the topics you would want to discuss in that panel. The AME theme is embrace disruption. But before I do that, I want to ask you a question that I ask most of my guests here. Lean manufacturing has been disruptive in different ways over the past decades. What was your first exposure to new ways of manufacturing, in particular here, lean manufacturing?
My first exposure was at Potomac Photonics in Maryland, that had been an R&D company, and the founder, Paul Christensen, was looking for ways to develop a miniaturized excimer laser at 193 nanometers. And I joined him in the company as co-founder of the commercial division to commercialize that laser. So I helped them go from being an R&D company to implementing more codified manufacturing processes like lean. I had studied lean, of course, the Deming work in my MBA program, which tells you I'm old. And I I find that my friends joke that lean rules my life and that I use lean in my kitchen. And I think that's okay. I think that I see lean as a way to reduce stress in our lives.
Well, I think that's an amazing summary, because if you're choosing to do something to improve your kitchen and that reduces stress in that setting, that's great. I think you and I are in agreement that lean is supposed to reduce stress for the people doing work, whether that's in a factory, a hospital. It should be eliminating waste, making work easier and more fulfilling, even though it seems like sometimes people get focused on tools instead of that important outcome. So I was wondering if you could just tell us more about, like, why that's so important to you in terms of making work less frustrating. I'm sure some of the Deming perspective that you had might have been helpful there.
Yeah, it really was. And I think that, as we talk about, and was really one of the main themes the last time I spoke at the AME conference. It was in Dallas. And one of the main things there was how lean is people-centric. And I find that a lot of managers don't respect the capability of people to solve problems. And so coming from the MIT Fab Lab world, we're a meritocracy. And I think one of the reasons that MIT is such a special place is that we believe that everyone can solve problems, and given the tools and the education and the opportunity. And I really think it goes beyond, it goes so beyond just having your factory floor run in an efficient way, and taking, those savings down to the bottom line. I think it also goes to this real sense of belonging and being a true part of a team. And I walk into so many factories where there's, all this signage about the teams, but they treat people like pond scum. They treat them like they're just cogs in a wheel. And in fact, when you implement lean properly, most people, I think, want to contribute and have fun and feel valued. And when people feel valued, it just changes the whole dynamic in the company.
Yeah, and there is that distinction, as you put it, lean done properly, or words similar to that effect. Because I think one of the challenges is that anybody can do just about anything and put that lean label on what they're doing. And to your point, if a company has the mental model that employees are a cost and employees are a problem. I mean, like when I started showing my age, when I started at General Motors, that was the mental model. Employees were not viewed as a partner in a shared passion, which could have been the case, right? Building high-tech engines for Cadillacs, that's pretty cool stuff.
Yep.
But it was unfortunately like the culture there was really degrading to the frontline staff, and that was the biggest impediment to then trying to progress and be more Toyota-like as we got new leadership.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting thing, because what always struck me when I was visiting factories in Japan, which I did for many, many years. A third of my sales were in Japan at the beginning of the laser company commercialization. And in Japan, you have a small landmass with an awful lot of people. And people are far more gracious to each other. And I one time witnessed an accident in a parking lot, and they both jumped out of their cars and ran up to each other and started bowing and apologizing. And I spoke a little bit of Japanese, so I could understand, but they were apologizing to each other. And I thought, good Lord, that would never happen in the US. They'd be blaming each other and frustrated. And after, it was just, so I think the culture in Japan was really conducive to lean. And it has taken us in manufacturing in the US some time to embrace that cultural difference.
And I would propose, and I'm curious to hear your reaction to this idea. The problem is not the adaptability of workers. It's a problem with the adaptability of managers who have been leading a certain way for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. That often seems to be the roadblock. I'm curious your perspectives on that as someone who's been in leadership roles yourself.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And when you coach people to work in a certain way, they, I find, just step up to the plate. And so I have a really active 3D printing registered apprenticeship with the U.S. Department of Labor. And they'll invariably say to me when they start, you mean you're not giving me the answer? What's the answer to this? And I'll say, well, here's how you're going to find this, and we're going to work on finding the answer together. Yeah. And one of them, after a while, said to me, at first I was really afraid that this was kind of like trick questions, and you were using it to kind of weed me out. And it was like, no, we have to work together to find the solutions. Mm-hmm. And and particularly in this day and age when we have YouTube and all of those wonderful resources for finding good examples and best practices, is a lot easier, than it was years ago when you had to go to the library. Mm-hmm. And so, I really expect our people to offer solutions, and they have different perspectives than I do. And they're the ones in the trenches. They are the ones who are they're doing those jobs. Although I've done all the jobs, at any given moment, I'm not doing all the jobs. Mm-hmm. And so I think that people are still surprised when you look to them for their opinion. And I think it's because often their opinions are pushed aside. And sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes their solution I've tried before. Actually, one of my lab manager recently said something, and I said, well, I've done this on this particular problem for 6 years, and here's the data. And he said, oh, yeah, I didn't realize you had tried all those things. And I tried all the things he suggested. So then we had to really start thinking outside the box, right? Mm-hmm. Then but you have to work together, and you have to reinforce that you're accepting the person, that you respect their ability to really step up to the plate and create some good solutions.
Yeah, and that story really illustrates the difference between just somebody else might, it would have been proud and like, well, you're wrong, I know better. And then they're discouraged from speaking up again. And it doesn't take, sometimes it doesn't take more than one interaction like that for people to say, I've learned that speaking up is risky. Yep. And I can't be wrong. And if we want to make sure we're not wrong, the easiest way to do that is to not take risks and not speak up, whether that's in continuous improvement or as an entrepreneur. It's like you've got to be willing to take those steps and build a culture where people are willing to try things. And
exactly. Right? And sometimes, ultimately I decide, right? Ultimately, mm-hmm. I make the final decision of whether something's going to happen or not. Mm-hmm. Sure. But I think when you have good balance, not long ago, one of our registered apprentices decided to put a calendar, to write a calendar on our whiteboard. And I'm not in that particular lab all the time, and I can't see that calendar. And I said to him, you're welcome to keep a calendar here on the whiteboard, but you've got to duplicate it in our online calendar, because I am often working at our other lab, or I'm traveling, or I'm in my home office, and I'm not there to see who's coming in that day or that you're going to be off that day. you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that when you communicate it, and because we do a lot of peer review in our training classes, I really have worked hard to get our people to move away from the you words, you did this and you
Mm.
should and all of that, but more about, well, how does that work? Or, I happen to see that this failed. How can we fix this?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that went wrong? And then I can tell them why I think it went wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and see where we meet in the middle. But I have to say that at Potomac, I mean, we very, very rarely had people leave the company, and it was because they were so respected by my partner and I.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that the story and what you're saying there illustrates that, of, like you said, working together with people and coaching people through, whether you call it brainstorming or testing different things. There's a difference between knowing the answer and figuring it out.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that seems really powerful.
And I really think a problem with the education system is that teachers were trained, and I have education advanced degrees. Teachers were trained that they had to know the answer.
Mm.
And so we do all project-based learning, and it's getting the teachers, and that's not very different from the mentors in an apprenticeship program or managers in a plant. It's getting them to feel so comfortable with themselves to be able to say, gee, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
And, we're going to have to figure it out. We're going to have to go find the answer. And maybe I know somebody who knows the answer, but why don't you start with maybe a literature search?
Yeah. So let's shift, and I appreciate your focus on workforce development, and we'll talk about that. But I wanted to ask you first, talking about a problem that people are trying to figure out how to solve in all sorts of settings. Let's focus on manufacturing. You wrote, when your book was released in 2018, U.S. manufacturing companies are expected to face a shortage of 2 million skilled workers by the year 2020. I'll just ask: Did that prediction come true? Was it worse than predicted? How much worse has it been made by the pandemic?
It is worse. I don't know exact numbers because I haven't looked at it recently, sure, but it is much worse. The Manufacturing Institute and NAM are still looking at big reductions in number of skilled workers. And I think that's, as I talk about in the book, that is one of the big problems is, we already had this skills gap where, and even though I wrote it, I did all the research in the last 6 months of 2017. So the information was pretty fresh, but it hasn't changed radically. What has changed is that the technologies that I talked about, and I was particularly interested in manufacturing, but those technologies are now ubiquitous across industries. Mm-hmm. So now you've got robots who are the janitors in Walmart stores. Mm-hmm. And now you've got self-driving, delivery vehicles, and it's everywhere. You've got the dentists using 3D printing. And so the only difference that I'm seeing is that it's exacerbated beyond manufacturing, and the Great Resignation, did make it worse, where people didn't want to go back. I'm hearing in the world that the pending recession, if it does happen, is probably going to force a lot of people to go back to working in person. And I also read something, and I can't remember where I read it in the last couple of weeks, that Gen Z actually is missing the social interactions. It's a very social group, and they're actually missing getting to see other people and other human beings, and that a lot of them are switching back to social jobs. But it is an ongoing problem having these large numbers of job openings and not having a good pool, of candidates.
Yeah. And so for some of these new technologies involving robotics and 3D printing and laser machining and things like that, what when you look at the technologies, then how do you define the skills that are needed, or how do you figure out which skills are most in short supply for that new technology environment?
Well, as I talk about in the book, I had been asked by a number of the Fab Labs in the United States to develop a 2-year curriculum for digital fabrication, and I thought, well, I'd worked on this for my factory, but I knew what I needed, and so I looked at it and I thought, well, I'm going to have to come up with a lowest common denominator. So I spoke with 200 manufacturers on what were the skills they needed for operators and technicians. I didn't see as much of a gap in engineers because, we've convinced everybody they have to go to college. So they go to college and become an engineer, which means we have no CNC machinists and we have no welders. And there's a huge gap in electricians right now. I mean, it's really serious. Yeah. So I spoke to all of these companies, and it turned out 95% of them were looking for people who had problem-solving skills. And I'm not surprised by that, because all of the new technologies that are coming on board, you haven't got the old guy in the back of the plant who's been there 30 years and can come and get, the latest metal 3D printer up and running. You really have to be able to take these machines. And I see the 3D printing industry where the laser industry was 30 years ago, where companies were just starting to understand that they needed customer service. And
not just technology.
Right. And I thought that HP entering the production 3D printing market around the time that I wrote the book was so fantastic, because they forced people to become more professional and to up their game on the customer service side. You can't depend upon the manufacturer in a new industry. And so you actually need somebody who can fix these new machines and get them up and running, but you also need people who can bring in new technologies and develop the processes that you need for your particular factory floor. The technologies are changing so quickly, and so many new technologies are coming on board, that to say you're going to train somebody for X may not be applicable in even a year. And so that was really the very big thing they wanted. They wanted hands-on experience. They did want digital skills like CAD design and metrology, because the tools are digital. And many of them wanted 3D printing skills, because subtractive and additive are just so different. So but that was across the board. I mean, 95% of Fortune 10 down to startups.
So it's interesting. It sounds like I was surprised to hear that some of these new technologies, it sounds like, increases demand for older trades that have been around a long time, welding and electricians, or how much of that is increased? I might have this wrong, so let me ask it as a question. How much of that is due to increased demand versus just reduced supply of, like you said, people think I have to go to college instead of learning a trade?
On the demand side, it is that the skills have become digital. So, and I quote Thomas Friedman from the New York Times in the book, because he had visited a welding company, I want to say in Minnesota. I wrote the book a long time ago, and I think they were in Minnesota. Yeah. And they had been a welding company, and they got a really high-tech contract with in the defense space. And suddenly they really needed to do welding that was far more complex, far more advanced. It was truly advanced manufacturing. And so the old programs that just trained welders were no longer relevant, and they need people who can read CAD files, who can deal with the digital side of the tools, but also understand metrology and more complex measurement systems. And so that's the demand side. So the demands have changed. And then on the supply side, you are exactly right. I mean, we've convinced everybody that, you must go to college. And it's just not for everyone. And but we end up with, I mean, when I went to high school, we had two tracks. You had the college prep track and you had the vo-tech track. And that's disappeared. Everyone is just, channeled on this college track that may or may not be right for the person. And there are some wonderful jobs. I can't, in my book, the second book is behind me, and it's an augmented reality book. And I have video that pops up of people talking about these kinds of jobs. And there's a guy from Potomac Photonics, John Ford, in it, who couldn't make it through community college. He loved math, didn't like anything else. He was a hands-on learner, not a book learner. Took a job with our company as an entry-level operator of a laser system. And he, in the video that's in the book, he says, any job can have a bad day. But how bad can your day be if you get to play with lasers every day? And John has gone on to become an engineer and run 4 laser labs. And, I look at particularly in the maker movement, and so many of the kids on the robotics teams, and how fun is that? And you can make a decent living where you can support a family without all the college debt. And you shouldn't get me started on that topic. I mean, I have to give you a chance to ask questions.
Oh, that's right. Oh, it's good. I mean, it's an important topic. It's an interesting topic. I do want to go back a little bit before kind of diving back into this idea of vocational training or reskilling or different types of work. We talk about this skill of problem solver or making sure everybody has that. It's not a trade, it's not a job class, it's a skill everybody should have. What sorts of methodologies do you find most useful to teach people? I think of a big part of Lean is at least some approaches to problem solving. I'm curious if you teach people some of those methods and or other methodologies to get better at solving problems.
Well, I think that most of the MIT graduates that I've ever met complain heavily about the problem sets, but I have never met an MIT grad who could not solve a problem.
Sure.
And my partner had done his master's at MIT, PhD at Berkeley, and he just could solve any problem, and would go to visit a customer in a totally different field, like chemical analysis, and he would solve their problems for them. And I think that the methodologies that schools and project-based learning really came out of McGill in their medical school. But that kind of teaching method I think is key and has to start at the lower grades. And so that then when you get someone, they already are used to problem solving. They're used to being able to do approximations. Being able to do approximations is something that really everyone should be able to do in their everyday life, and be able to get close to an answer and then refine it. So I think that there's a lot of lean things that we do that are important, but I really think it comes back to the school systems, and that we really have to get these kids young and get them into a mindset that is so different. And we also use peer review so that they learn to work in teams collectively and take everyone's good ideas. And it comes back to our education system really needing to be revamped.
Yeah. And I mean, and then back to what we were talking about earlier, some of the workplace culture being revamped. Because again, to that story that you told, it sounded like a process of kind of, team-based, experiential learning. So I think like what you were sharing and what they were doing, it sounded like a process of coaching them through that, because one doesn't have to have a degree from MIT or a PhD from anywhere,
Right.
generally, to solve problems related to your day-to-day work. So, so to that point, what sorts of frameworks, how much of it can be taught versus just developed by having hopefully a good coach as you're trying to solve problems?
Yeah, I heard someone from one of the automotive companies on a panel one time say that problem solving could not be taught. And that is wrong. I mean, that is just wrong. Problem solving can be taught, and it can be taught K through 12. It can be taught in college and grad school and on the job on the factory floor. And it really is. And I use the Stanford D School design thinking model. And it's always so fascinating to me that even the people that work for me, when we're in a design thinking exercise, they just want to go right to their first idea. And
fixate on it.
Yeah, and you just have to, rip their little fingers off the keyboard or off the chalk. And no, we have to, I want to hear every idea. Think about every possible way, and think of the craziest idea. Think of, that you're going to bring some Martians down, and they're gonna, I want to hear every possible idea, no matter how simple and efficient or how outlandish. And I think that when you get people, particularly in teams, who start to work that way, and it opens up so much possibility then when they go to that first idea, and they're not really thinking outside the box. And it's often the noisiest, most vocal person who, brings up that idea first. And, you need to get everybody involved. And that's one of the ways that I really try to develop our work. And I'm actually going to be teaching problem solving for my city's managers through design thinking, and they're going to be in for a surprise. Because I think they're thinking, well, it's going to be a lecture, and they have no idea how much fun this is going to be. And I think that's the thing. I see how we teach, and both on the factory floor with our workers and in our classes. And it's so much fun, and people really enjoy it, and they come to work happy to be there.
Yeah.
That's what we want, right? We want people to have good lives.
And people's enjoyment in the workplace affects people's lives. There are studies that point to health impacts, that hating your job or being in a really dysfunctional workplace environment has all sorts of spillover effects, unfortunately, to physical health, mental health, home life. Yeah.
Exactly. And when I see somebody who is off kilter, I give them maybe they don't feel well that day. I mean, not by the minute, but if it goes on for more than a day or so, I'll talk to them about, so what's going on? It seems, is it us? Is it us? Is it something in your personal life? Do you need some time off? I mean, tell me what's going on, that you seem not yourself. Maybe you're in pain. Maybe, you have something physical going on. And how can we work with you to solve that problem? Yeah. And because otherwise it just festers.
Right. And
right.
Yeah, a little bit of caring and empathy goes a long way. Yes.
Yeah, it does. And it's good for me because it's not fun for me to go into a cranky office or a cranky lab or people being, destructive, internal, I don't mean physically destructive, but destructive to the culture that I have built. Yeah. And it's not good for me. And it's not good for the person. And we all, it has to be win-win.
Sure, for sure. So, Sarah, you touched earlier on, the idea that a lot of, people have been convinced college degree is the only way to go. It seems like a lot of companies have been convinced that hiring college graduates is the only way to go. So you shared recently on LinkedIn about how General Motors has made a change to policy. I had seen this in the news, I think even before you shared it, looking at skills, not just degrees. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that dynamic of, I think you framed it, degree creep. How does that end up developing, and what can we do about that?
Yeah, and we're highly educated, and I love that I had the opportunity to have education, and it was right for me. It was the right path for me, and I love school, and I think all the time about going back and getting a PhD in engineering, for fun, because I love school. But and so not to be disparaging of colleges, but colleges hit upon this idea that the more people that went to college, the more money they made, right? I mean, it's a typical business decision. So colleges went from being kind of for the public good to being businesses. And it was all about how do we, make more money. And the way to do that is to convince the universe that everybody needs a college degree and you're going to make more money. Well, also in my book, I talk about a study that was done in Baltimore that compared the salaries of people who had degrees at the same level, so say an AA degree, in a STEM field versus a non-STEM field. And I think the STEM field people made 23% more than the non-STEM field. So it's one thing if you have an inclination, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a brain surgeon, you want to be a rocket scientist up the hill near me at Los Alamos. Clearly, you need to go to college, and if you have the inclination and the desire and the capability, both in terms of the school capability, but also the financial wherewithal, that's all great. But what colleges did is they convinced people that they all needed to go to college. So if you didn't have an inclination in a STEM field, you would end up going to a field like English. And while I think it's wonderful that we have English majors, and I'm really thankful that I know how to write well, if you're expecting to get out of college and pay back all of that debt, it's just not going to happen. And so all degrees are not equal. They're just not equal. I hate to say it, but and where you went to school is not equal. So I have an undergraduate degree in piano performance from a very famous conservatory, I then did a master's in pedagogy at the University of Rhode Island, and it was shocking to me that there were people there getting piano performance degrees from this very nice little school, but I mean, my class in New York was not going to all get jobs or become famous concert pianists. And if we weren't going to make it, I mean, how are these poor kids in this other low-level school. I'm not to be disparaging, but, it was not the same level that I was used to. So I think we've done a real disservice to people by convincing them. And so the colleges then were churning out all these people. And as the employers started to look at it, it was like, well, we could have somebody with a bachelor's degree. And now if they have an AA degree, they can actually do wiring, or they can actually do welding, or, whatever it was. And there was a lot of assumptions there. And I think that it started to become that the HR people, it was easier for them to just say, oh, it requires an AA degree, not just the skill of running a 3D printer or running a welding machine. I had an incident here in New Mexico where a 3D printing software company had asked me about the community college developing some training programs for them. And they ended up doing it, hiring the people, and the people got there and couldn't do any of the tasks. And I had said to him at the time, the college could do this, but I can just develop digital badges for you. And he called me not long ago and said, I made such a mistake. I had to invest so much into the college, and you could have had the badges, and the people could have, because I've sent him people who could actually perform. Yeah. And I think GM moving to this model was really important. It's more work for the HR people, because now you can't just check a box. Yeah. You have to really examine it more closely. This movement started with Ginny Rometty and Tim Cook when they were on the workforce task force in the Trump White House. And in 2020, the Trump White House issued an executive order that required that all government agencies, federal government agencies, had to re-examine their hiring practices to look at skills, not just degrees. And IBM has been doing this for almost decades. IBM has that wonderful apprenticeship program in IT. Ginny Rometty is really my role model. And in more recent times, it's Byron Auguste, I think is the pronunciation, from Opportunity at Work, and are helping the states of Colorado and Maryland, for example, to see that between the colleges and the HR departments, we've created, really something that's not tenable. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it's a complex topic, and that, more relatively local to you, you've been working with Los Alamos National Laboratories. Are you helping convince them, or helping them make progress on looking at skills more so than just degrees?
Yeah, we have. And we have worked with LANL for 2 years on this topic. So, it's slow changing perceptions, and particularly in an institution that is run all by PhDs, right? I mean, LANL is full of rocket scientists, so their bias is for degreed people. Sure. But particularly when the White House executive order came out, they started to open up a little bit. And what I was particularly interested in is they have an entry-level technician job through, and they had to also work with DOE, because there were DOE labs, so they had to get DOE on board. So it's way more complicated, than just the HR department saying, oh, gee, we're now going to take skills. So they finally got everybody together, and what they are calling it is an AA degree, or equivalent experience, so that does give some leeway to each department. So it could be a registered apprenticeship, it could be work on the job. There's just a lot more options for how people can get into that pathway to Lannel, which are very good jobs. People stay, people don't leave Lannel, and they have wonderful benefits. And for a poor state like New Mexico, it's really important. And it was announced by their head of HR, Lori, now I won't think of Lori's name, Montaletto, I think is her last name, at our workforce summit in May in Santa Fe. And I was just so thrilled to see that progress at a big institution that we can point to. And, but it is more work for HR. It is more work. And the way that we teach with our digital badges is all portfolio based. So, what allows me to do as an employer is to look at the portfolio. The student has to identify a problem either at life, work, school, sports, and then solve that problem and with photography or video, and write up this portfolio. And it tells me an awful lot about a student's ability to solve problems. But that's a lot more work because I have to read through all these. I can't just say, oh, they've got a piece of paper. And Byron from Opportunity at Work calls that the paper ceiling. And I think that is just such a great term.
Sure. So maybe one other topic, Sarah, that we can talk about a little bit, 3D printing, since you're an expert in that domain, how would a company decide, how would you help them decide when 3D printing isn't just cool, but actually the preferred technology because it's more effective in different dimensions of quality, or just being able to do things you couldn't do otherwise? How do you help them sort that out?
Well, it's changing really rapidly. There are three areas where hands down 3D printing is the solution of choice. The first is rapid prototyping, which has been used for a very long time. I think it was Ford who, 10, 15 years ago, bought desktop 3D printers to put onto the desks of their R&D staff, their R&D engineers. And so rapid prototyping has been a solution for a long time. For a lot of reasons. It's cheaper and faster than trying to do something where you have to make a mold, or even to use a subtractive technology. And you can get a functional prototype immediately. It comes out of the printer, able to demonstrate function. The other time that it makes sense is complex geometries, and you're seeing a lot of that in the aerospace industry. Airbus has told our group at MIT that we do a contract R&D for that. They're saving 55% in weight when they go to complex geometries. Things, and when you're doing a complex geometry in 3D printing, you're able to design something in a way that could never be manufactured with subtractive or any other methodology. And so when you have those complex geometries, you're really looking at a whole different ballgame in terms of weight, in terms of number of parts. There's so many factors that bring cost savings to the whole process. And the third time is when you're using mass customization, and that is because you can quickly produce one, and so you can produce a million different designs and print a million that are different. If I wanted to make money in the jewelry business, I would not 3D print my earrings. I would get a mold made and take them to China, and I could make them for less than a penny a piece, probably less than half a penny a piece. I can make 16 of these cubes in 7 hours. So that's just not economically viable.
Sure.
And I am always surprised when I talk to 3D printing people in different fields that they're always trying to shoehorn the application into 3D printing, and it's not always the right choice. Many times it's the right choice, but sometimes it's not, and it's just another tool on the factory floor.
Mm-hmm. And when you and I had a chance to talk previously, you told me about something happening here in Dallas. I was able to go find a video of a 3D printed home that looked like it was actually, if I heard right, 3D printed concrete.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of familiar with some of these applications?
Yeah. 3D printed houses are a pretty hot topic right now. And I'm still not 100% convinced that they're advanced enough for the economics side of it to be viable. I heard that a company in Dallas went to 3D print a house in Tucson or Tempe, I guess it was. And suddenly the concrete is in a totally different humidity situation, and it took them 3 weeks to figure out how to fix the humidity problem. So they're still, I think, working out the logistics of it. I am working with a company out of New York, and that is able to 3D print a 1,700 square foot house in 36 hours. So they have some very sophisticated processes that are able to increase speed. And as you know, speed, time is money. So what we're trying to do in Dallas for the AME conference is to 3D print a house with Habitat for Humanity's Dallas chapter. And I just think it would be a great example of, our theme is disrupting, embracing disruption and all the technologies that are bringing disruption to our fields, whether it's manufacturing or anything else. And I thought, well, that would be something that would definitely disrupt a company like or an organization like Habitat. I think that beyond 3D printing, I think the other opportunity in construction is in robotics. And there's a lot of things that robots can do and I'm thinking particularly of skyscrapers, where you're looking at something where you're reducing safety risks for human beings. My feeling is I work with the augmented worker group out of the World Economic Forum, and our feeling is that, robots are there to they're cobots. They are there to really enhance the capabilities of humans and free us up to do the cognitive functions that are so special to us. And someday the robots will be equal to us, but they're not there yet.
Yeah, that I've heard Toyota people talk about the application of robots, as with any technology, not doing it just to do it, but like you said, in instances where safety for humans would be a concern, let the robot help or let the robot do it.
Right.
Or if you really can prove quality would be better. My understanding is that certain painting or certain welding is done better by robots, and some of those tasks are better done by humans, and the humans sometimes can be more flexible. So it's interesting to figure that out. I was going to ask one other thing about the 3D printed house. What they showed was, I think they admitted it was pretty simple. It almost looked like cinder block or poured concrete. And I think they made a point that you made even about earrings or other products, that there are probably certain homes that could only be built with 3D printing methods, complex geometries, or something really architecturally interesting. We might see that more so than a replacement of, like you said, the plastic molded part versus 3D printing, prefabricated traditional home versus 3D printed. But I guess it starts with these experiments.
It does, and I think that I don't know if I sent you the link to the house in I think it was in Austin, where it had curved walls, and it was so interesting because on the inside of those curved walls, then you had these really interesting rooms that were not squares. You had these rooms that had little alcoves where you could put a little table and chair, and they were adorable. That was just really, really cute.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, it's great that you're helping people in all sorts of settings figure out not just new disruptive technologies, but in a good way, disruptive approaches to training and hiring and developing and leading. So again, our guest here today has been Sarah Boisvert. Again, she's going to be part of this panel discussion in Dallas at the AME annual conference, October 17th to 20th. I'm sure if you're there, you'll get a chance to come ask Sarah your own questions about these things, either as part of the panel or just being there around the conference. So Sarah, thank you so much for sharing with us today, a wide range of topics and expertise that you have to share. It's been a lot of fun.
It was my pleasure.